Welcome to the Untold with Heidi Buzo. Today we will be talking about a very special and untold story that, though it did start a couple of years ago, yet its ripples effect continues. During the war in Syria, which continues today, there was a point when young Israeli IDF soldiers and ordinary Israeli families were confronted by a new reality. Syrian men, women, and children were at the Israeli borders asking for help. They were afraid of being abducted, tortured, and ultimately killed by the Assad regime and its backers. For those of you who know about the history of war between Syria and Israel, you will understand the significance of this choice that the Israeli IDF and other Israeli citizens and NGOs finally made. I'm not going to keep you waiting. Here, joining us to tell us more about this amazing story are Eyal Dror, retired IDF commander and the founder of the Good Neighbor Unit, the Israeli aid to the Syrian civilians, and Ruth Doron, founder and CEO of We Cannot Stand Silent. Thank you so much both for joining me today.
Hi, thank you, Avi. We are happy to be here.
Good evening, everybody.
I want you to tell us a little bit more to our audience who probably don't know a lot about the background, the war and the history of conflict that we know that was between Israel and Syria, and having to make those decisions. We're talking about 18, 19-year-old Israeli soldiers who were at the borders seeing this new development and making decisions. Tell us a little bit more, Eyal, about this.
So first of all, as most of the audience know or don't know, between Israel and Syria, there isn't any peace agreement. We are after some terrible wars happened in 67 and 73. And since the end of the 73 war, we had a ceasefire agreement with Syria. So for 40 years, it was a very quiet border. Unfortunately for the Syrians, in 2013, because of the Arab Spring, it began one of the most tragic events inside Syria, a terrible civil war. And what happened is on the Israeli-Syrian border, we found some of our bitter enemies, like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Hezbollah. All of them made some big challenges for the state of Israel and the IDF. However, it was another something happened on that side of the border, and I'm speaking about human beings, about Syrians, civilians who lost almost everything because of that war. So it was an internal issue in Syria impacted on the Israeli-Syrian border, and the IDF decided to react to these challenges. One of the solutions was Operation Good Neighbor.
You founded Operation Good Neighbor. Tell us, Eyal, how did that come to life? It must have, went through a process of decision making to actually commit to such a change in policy. Now committing to help hundreds of families, probably tens of thousands of civilians that were coming from the Syrian side.
The number of the Syrians were hundreds of thousands, if we want to be correct. Mm-hmm. And it started in 2013 in a very small way when Israel decided to provide help for Syrian wounded, people who were wounded from the war. It was very quiet and very secret operation where Syrians reached the border fence and we evacuated them to the Israeli hospitals. 3 years later, in 2016, when, let's say, it has been built a little bit trust between Israelis and Syrians. And it is very important to understand that issue because Syrians, and this is something that we learned from them, were educated for centuries to hate the state of Israel. This is what they have been told by the Assad regime, that Israel is their worst enemy and Israel want to conquer the Syrian land. So building the trust wasn't something easy. However, 3 years after Israel started to evacuate the Syrian wounded, the Syrians asked for more help, and the IDF decided to establish a unit, the Good Neighbor Unit. And our mission, my mission as a lieutenant colonel who was chosen to be the commander of that project, was to increase dramatically the humanitarian aid provided to the Syrians, meaning to think 24/7 about the enemy, or if I want to do it a little bit more accurate, to think 24/7 about people, human beings living in an enemy country. This was the beginning of Operation Good Neighbor in 2016.
Now, Ruth, you are an educator, a teacher, and you started seeing what's happening on the Israeli borders in the news. Tell us how you came to that decision to be involved yourself.
Okay, as you said, like the whole world, I was glued to the news, watching and hearing the terrible testimonies from Syria. You know, we are in the 21st century. It's 2015, 16, 17, unlike 1939, and I refer to Second World War, and specifically I'm thinking about the Holocaust. Unlike 1939, nowadays everything is online. It's a world of social media. The information can fit into the palm of our hand. We hear the victim stories and the horrified testimonies at real time. We saw cities and villages that were completely destroyed, ruined by Assad regime. We saw chemical attacks, families that was torn apart, thousands of killed and injured men, women, and children. When I'm saying thousands, they're talking about 500,000 killed people and more than 1.5 million people that injured. They're talking about 12 to 13 million refugees and displaced people. Women were raped, and so many terrible stories that arrived to us. We just couldn't stand silent. I must say, moreover, Syria is almost walking distance from our northern villages. Israeli people could actually hear the booming while they were sleeping peacefully in their bed or sitting around bonfire in camping trip or vacation. This huge conflict between the two realities, you know, one peacefully and one so horrified, so close and yet so far, was unbearable and horrifying. So the combination of all of this together made us feeling very strongly that we must act. We must offer an end to the people beyond the border.
And from realizing that you wanted to do something about this to actually doing something about it, which is a very different thing, tell us how that happened, because I'm sure that a lot of people were thinking like, well, how could we be involved? We've been in a war with this country for so long. How could we fit into this equation? So what were the thought process following your decision that you can't just stay silent?
One of the major turning point was on September 2015. I remember seeing the photo of 3-year-old Eyal Dror, that was his name, whose body was washed out of the sea in Turkey. It was a terrible ending to his family journey seeking for freedom. At that time, I share with you, my youngest son was the same age and even resembled Eyal. And I remember telling to myself that Eyal's family fate in other story, in other period, could be ours as well. 1 minute you are living a normal life, you wake up in the morning, you eat breakfast, you go to work, the children go to school, to kindergarten, normal life, like Syrian civilian had before. And the next minute, your world is turned upside down. So I kept this photo in my room. I must say till today, I don't know if you can see it, but it's in my room. It's this photo.
Mm-hmm.
And I swear to myself, I promise to myself that I never ever forget. This was one of the biggest turning point for me to start acting. As a human being, I understand that I can't stand silent. As a Jew, as an Israeli neighbor, as a woman, as a mother, as a daughter, I felt that I simply cannot stand silent. And I felt also very strongly that the words "never again," which were said after the Holocaust, must receive a practical meaning. They can't stay just words. And that was the practical meaning for me. And so we started later on, very soon later on.
Eyal, so you started the unit and you started helping people. Tell us about the amount of people that were coming on daily basis. How big was this operation? And you said hundreds of thousands of people that you've helped. How did you expand this operation based on the high number of people that started to flood the borders?
So if we want to speak a little bit about numbers, so in 2.5 years of operation, we executed 700 humanitarian mission aid. 700 times we chose to risk our lives going the border fence, opening a border fence to an enemy country, an area controlled by ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and doing some humanitarian aid for those Syrian people. Now, we did many projects, so it was the wounded people that continued to enter Israel, 4,500 of them. We established a project which for me was the most exciting thing that I did in the army, maybe in my life. We called it Doctor's Visit. Now, the purpose of that operation was to take care for children, but not wounded children, children suffering from chronic diseases. So every week we opened the border fence for 25 children and their mothers, and we took them to meet the Israeli expert doctors. Children suffering from diabetic, a heart problem, urologic problem. When the Israeli expert doctors examine them and give them the correct medicine, they could have continued their normal life. 1,400 children entered in this operation. We opened the field clinic by an American NGO, Christian Americans living in Louisiana. This is an NGO, and they opened a field clinic, treated 8,000 Syrians, providing them antibiotics, a family doctor. We established a maternity hospital, more than 1,000 babies born in a semi-Western hospital, and we delivered hundreds of thousands of tons of medicines, medical equipment, food, and diesel fuel. How we did it? Most of it was by collaboration with NGOs like Ruth, and we will speak about Ruth in a second, but it was so unique because I think it is the first time in history that Jewish organization, Christian organization, Muslim organization collaborating together under the command of an Israeli IDF officer to save Muslims' life. This was so special in this project. Every NGO had its expertise and every NGO got its mission. Ruth was one of my favorites because her story, it wasn't an NGO with resources. It wasn't an NGO that worked 30 years. It was Israeli citizens that they decided to do something, not just to speak, literally to do.
And I do want to ask you about that, Ruth. So you made the decision, you wanted to create an organization that actually was created called We Cannot Stand Silent. The name speaks for itself. And I want you to share with us about the reaction from other Israelis who started volunteering and joining in your efforts. How did that happen?
Okay, I'll try to start from the beginning. It started as a small and simple and spontaneous initiative that actually grew bigger and bigger as we made our activity known. It began when I called a few women, very good friends of mine. None of us, and this is important to say, had a background in humanitarian aid, as Eyal said. But I think we all have sensitivity to human rights, especially those of women and children that are never the cause of wars, but always the victims of wars. So we combined efforts to establish this organization. We named, as you said, We Cannot Stand Silent. The five of us were a pretty good team, I think. You know, it's a woman energy. I don't believe it would happen any other way. And we started. In the beginning, all we did was send out a few emails requesting donation for baby diapers. Then we moved on to baby formula, women hygiene equipment, and so on. To our great surprise and happiness, hundreds of donations came in from individual people and families who wanted to take part in this effort. It seems like we just opened a door and hundreds of families joined the efforts immediately. Over time, we had people all over Israel donating equipment with it was 120 collecting points from east to west and north to south. Uh, it was exciting, I must say. And not only families joined the effort, there were a few bar mitzvah boys who donated money. It was incredible, matched by their parents. There was a birthday girl that I won't forget her, who requested donation of diapers and baby formula instead of presents. I remember receiving a phone call from a newlyweds who wanted to share their happiness with people who needed it. And they give us blanket from the wedding and money from the wedding. It was amazing. But I want to share one of the strongest things that happened that I was part of, that I saw. It was a large group of elderly women. Part of them, among them was Holocaust survivors. And with a lot of patience, with their two hands, they knit beautiful tiny hats and mittens for the Syrian babies in the freezing Syrian winter. I think I will never forget that. And maybe we can share after a picture of what they did, of the hats and the mittens. It's amazing. There is endless story, but I'll share two more. There was a school in Jerusalem that the manager couldn't stand silent as well. And he cleared out a huge storage room for the thousands of donations we were flooded with from all over Israel. And every day, he sent teachers and students from his school and nearby schools also to help us organize and pack the equipment. I think it took us 2 weeks just organize the huge amount that arrived there. A high-tech company from Tel Aviv donated a great big space for the donation that came from all over Tel Aviv. It was truly touching and amazing for us. What is important for me to say about the Israeli people, that it wasn't one profile that matched the people who donate. Everyone did, from the right side of the political map and from the left. Secular people and religious Orthodox people, younger people and elder people, Arabic, Palestinian people. I remember one Palestinian coming to my home with dozens of babies' bottle, asking for me to transfer them to Syria. It was amazing, but I think it happened because it is so basic, finally. It's basic. When you see such suffer, to offer a hand. And as I feel it, it was people-to-people action, people to people, beyond borders, beyond definitions, beyond religions issues. It just was people to people.
This is so beautiful, everything you're saying, Ruth. Just so beautiful, so inspirational. Eyal, what were the reactions that you were receiving from the Syrians who've also been brainwashed against Israel for decades, and then seeing that the IDF and Israeli women, NGOs, people from all walks of life in Israel are going there to help them and to rescue them, basically, from them being killed by their own so-called president, Bashar al-Assad, and whoever is backing him.
So it was amazing to see the reaction of those Syrians, because yes, in the beginning, it was a little bit scary for them. They were hesitating to cross the border, France, for example. But after a few hours with us, it was amazing to see them playing, going between the IDF soldiers, between their weapons. And, for example, and when I asked him, aren't you afraid from those soldiers? And it was, for me, so proud. I was so proud to hear, you are not the Syrian soldiers, you are Israelis We feel very safe among you. We know that you will not hurt us. Now, it was very appreciated for them because a small fact, they knew that instead of being at home with our families, we are getting wet on the winter times and freezing in the winter times in order to help them. It was very appreciated. Now, this meeting with them, it was something beyond an imagination. As an Israeli, I'm not speaking as an IDF officer, as an Israeli, as a human being, because nothing that I did in my life prepared me to the moment when I was speaking with a Syrian boy, speaking in Arabic, of course, ask him a very simple question. When you will be adult, what you will choose to do? A very simple question. Now, when I ask my 9 years old girl, she's changing her mind every time. But this boy wasn't answering. And just when I asked him in the third time, he told me, I will not be an adult because probably I will die in a year or two because the war. So it was so amazing to have the opportunity to play with him, to give him a candy. I'm not speaking about saving his life. I'm speaking just about giving him hope, giving him the understanding that the world is not a bad place. And now for the Syrians who were educated that we are the enemies, coming to the Israeli hospitals, meeting Arab people, because in the north of Israel, this is where the most of the Syrian has been treated. A big amount of the population of the Israelis speaking Arabic because we have Muslims in the north, we have Druze, we have Cherkess, all kinds of religions who are speaking fluently Arabic before Hebrew. So for them, meeting Arab people who is speaking with them Arabic, who is praying with them to the same God, who is saying with them the Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So for them it was amazing because they didn't know that in Israel Arab can live. So for them it was amazing. It changed a little bit, I'm sure it changed a little bit their minds. When they go back home, they share the message that Israel maybe is not the enemy. Israel is the only place that help us. Israeli soldiers risking their lives every night to bring us food, something that our government should have done and decided not to do. So again, step by step, night by night, we build the trust, and I can tell you that it was well appreciated. How do I know it? Because they told us. So when the project came to an end, all of them told us so.
And I don't want to turn this into asking about something negative, but Ruth, you said that there was support from everybody, right, left, even Arabs joined into helping. But were there any criticisms? And I do kind of want to ask Eyal about the same thing, because we know that in the northern part of Israel, there were some Arab Israelis who are supportive of the Assad regime. Was that ever brought up? Or even people who were skeptical saying, we shouldn't be involved. This is not our war. We've been in conflict with this country for so long. Let's stay out of it.
Yeah, we met also this kind of reaction, but I tell you the truth, it was the minority. People said in Hebrew sentence like "poor of your people" before you help the other poors. So people who didn't want to donate, it's okay. But it was really the minority of the reaction that we received. What surprised me or made me happy was that the majority just joined the efforts.
Beautiful. And Eyal, I mean, did that happen? Because we know of some instances when there were at least reports that one of the wounded people were killed by an Arab in northern Israel because some of them do support the Assad regime.
So I can tell you, first of all, about myself. My father's cousin has been killed in the Yom Kippur War. He was a commander of a battalion. He fought against the Syrians and he lost his life on Mount Hermon, the same place that I visited and provided aid from that point to the Syrians. So of course there is some voices. I can tell you that 99% of the Israelis from the south to the north agreed with this operation when they heard about it. Yeah, it was this terrible accident when Druze from the north of the Golan Heights attacked an Israeli ambulance with Syrian wounded. But again, it was one accident in thousands of times Syrians entered the state of Israel. Now, I can tell you that most of the Israeli support, and how do I know it? One of the initiatives was all the villages from the Golan Heights, and we have more than 30 villages in the Golan Heights, reached to the IDF and asked, and they told us that what they are doing is making a donation, every village in his own people, with his own people, taking warm clothes and baby powder milk for the Syrians, and they ask us if we can just send our trucks to collect it. So it was an operation all over the Golan Heights for 1 week, and in the 8 days, we provided to the Syrians. So again, most of the Israelis was with this project, and I think yes, there is poors in Israel, and there is some volunteers helping the poor in Israel. Here it was something else. Here it was to provide help for the people slaughtering by their own government. I just wish to think that most of the Israelis that decided to help us remembered what could have happened in the 40s if some nations would have helped our people while they were slaughtering in Germany. So I can tell you proudly, as an Israeli, as a Jew, as an officer in the IDF, that I wish that every time we will be able to provide help to the others, and then we can be able to think, was it worth it or wasn't? I think that as Jewish people, and there is values that we are growing about them, about mutual aid, about compassion. It's not a cynical. This is how we are educating our children, and that project was, I think, a very interesting example for how we are taking our values and doing for other people, that we didn't know in our life.
Ruth, if you can share with us a few examples or specific stories from working in finding and obviously leading this NGO on the Israeli borders.
Yeah, I can tell you something in general and then a specific story. Like when winter arrived, we realized, and I remember this winter, it was a very tough winter, a freezing one. Eyal, do you remember it? It was
Again,
it was tough,
Freezing winter.
freezing winter, and we realized that thousands of children were freezing in this winter, and they're living in tents with no electricity, with no running water, barely with clothes to keep them warm. This is the point we started a crowdfund. Till then, we collected only products, but this was the point that we started a crowdfund, and then became a formal NGO. In fact, look, it's a different energy. When you sit in front of the computer, you click a button and you donate some money. Then actually the energy of actually going to the supermarket and buying baby diapers for people who need it. People, we felt, invested their hearts in this. They purchased and packed and transported the donation, sometimes still a very long distance, till they arrived our storage. And then we transferred it to Eyal, and in his turn delivered it into Syria. So some of them wrote letters of encouragement to the Syrian refugees in Hebrew, in Arabic, in English. I remember letters like, we hope you will be well. We hope one day we can meet and drink coffee together in the market. There is little letters that we take a photo in, actually. I felt that we touch each other, and it was very, very powerful. But thanks to these fundraising efforts, it's enabled us to buy 7,500 beautiful new warm coats. And we also reached out to big Israeli companies who donated huge amount. It was tons of toys, like trucks of toys, baby shoes, tents, and so many other important equipment.
Do you want to share a specific story you said?
I have two specific stories, very short
Yes.
one, with your permission. One was when I received a phone call from a volunteer that volunteer in the hospital beyond the border. Eyal told you about it, mentioned it before. And her voice was shaking. I remember full of tears. And she said that the women are begging for babies formula. They ran out of breast the milk, and this was the point that I actually understood that babies are starving to die, and we have to hurry up. It was an unforgettable call, I must say. And the second story is a nicer one. Is one of the donors bring us a box with diapers or baby formula, I don't remember what, but in the bottom of the box, she put chocolate packages. And I told her, listen, we can't transfer food right now, and anyway, it will melt till it will arrive to the destination. And she insisted. She wanted chocolate to arrive to one family, one few children in the middle of the war. And I thought to myself, maybe it's a good opportunity to ask her, yeah, did the chocolate did arrive to the destinations?
Did it arrive? Yeah,
They arrived.
it arrived.
They are,
Good.
they arrived.
So
Uh,
there,
Ruth spoke about chocolate, so I will ask you, Ivy, and I hope that you will not be embarrassed. But did you eat ice cream in the last year, for example?
Did I eat ice cream?
Yeah, did you get an ice cream one time in the last year?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Ruth spoke about chocolate. Those children, I'm almost sure it was their first time eating a chocolate. In the field hospital, the Americans people bought a ice cream machine, and we got pictures of children eating ice cream. Now, when I'm speaking with young people and asking about ice cream, they're eating every day. Can you imagine a world that a 9, 10, 11 years old boy or girl didn't eat an ice cream in her life? And it was the first time for her eating ice cream. Can you imagine a world that a boy didn't play with a teddy bear or with a toy, with a new toy in his life? This is the world that the Syrian children were living in. And this is why this mission, I told you before, it was the most exciting thing I did in my life, because in Hebrew we are saying that there is nothing worse than a curse of a child. But there isn't nothing beautiful than a smile of a child. And the opportunity again to give them the opportunity to smile, it was behind the imagination. It was amazing. It was amazing to see them eating the chocolate, eating the ice cream, playing with the toys, dancing because we gave them our phones and we heard YouTube with them, Arab songs, drawing with them. It was a very exciting operation, and I think that this is the most important thing in that operation. We are not speaking about Israelis, we are not speaking about Syrians, we are not speaking about Jews and about Muslims. We are speaking about human beings. We are all human beings. And I can tell you that 99% of the Israelis that were involved in this operation were proud for the opportunity to help other human beings. You will hear it from the doctors in the hospitals, from the nurses, from the soldiers who secured our work, from the NGOs, the Israelis or the American NGOs. You will hear it from everybody who had a small to a big involved in this project. You will hear it from everybody.
I want to ask you, Eyal, about the White Helmets. The White Helmets are a group of volunteered heroes who've been just going on their own to try to rescue the people from under the rebels in Syria. They've been systematically targeted by the Assad regime and its allies, but Israel did a major operation, specifically the IDF, to rescue those members of the White Helmets and their families. Please share with our audience about this courageous operation. Unbelievable. I saw the video by the IDF. How did that happen and the decision to actually do this? I want you to share this story with our audience about this amazing operation.
So the White Helmets, the problem was that they were the first to expose the world that the Assad regime is using gas and bombing civilian facilities. And when the Assad regime in June 2018 got a decision to reconquer the area of Dara and Quneitra, which are the two regions close to the Israeli-Syrian border, it came from the east to the west or from the east to the south, meaning they first conquered the cross passage between Syria and Jordan. In our region, it was a couple of hundreds of White Helmets people. We didn't work with them because they did their job and we did our job. But when the time became very close to the day that the Assad regime will complete conquering the area, our prime minister got some phone calls from his colleagues who sponsored the White Helmets in Syria. And we got the order now. It was Thursday night. We came back from a full day. We evacuated the American team of the Friendships Unlimited, the people who built the field clinic, because the ISIS started to move to their camp. So we evacuated them and we reached back to the border, to the camp, to our camp. It was Thursday night. And I go back home. And on Friday noon, I got a phone call and I've been told to communicate with the manager of the White Helmets in our region. Now it was an international operation, but we are, as the people who were on the field, on the battalion, the division, our mission was to communicate and to coordinate and to guide them. Now, 24 hours later on Saturday night, basically in the Hebrew calendar, it will be tomorrow. So tomorrow, 2 years ago, according to the Jewish date, we opened the border fence for a full night. Now, our operation took between 30 minutes to 90, 120 minutes, not more. Here, because it was more than 400 people, we had to open the border for all the night. Now, we could have heard the clashes between the regime to the rest of the rebels who didn't surround her. It was 150 meters from us. We can hear it, we can saw it. And we saw a lot of people on the other side of the border, over the 400. Now, it wasn't men, it was entire families, men and women and children and babies. For us who were standing down on the border fence, waiting for them, guiding them to enter, it was amazing to see them on the other side of the fence, and they were gripping of fear in their homeland, in Syria. And when they crossed to Israel, which was the devil, the enemy just a few years ago, they all smiled. They knew at that moment, when they crossed the gate, that their lives has been saved. At that night, we succeeded to save over than 400 human beings. Our mission was to rescue them from that border, and we drove them by buses to the Israeli-Jordanian border. They crossed to Jordan, and in Jordan, they got a new identities, new life by the countries who support them. But without the state of Israel, they all had been dead. And it was the last operation of the Good Neighbor, because a few days after the regime completed to conquer. So what a final operation, saving, to know that in your own voice, with your people, you saved over than 400 souls. It was amazing operation, 10 hours, a long night, a very long, a very tension night. In the end, as we said in the army, mission accomplished. The border has been closed, no injuries for our forces, and all the people that should have crossed and brought back life and safe to Jordan to continue their normal lives. And I will ask you, do you think, Heavy, that they will forget the state of Israel?
And all of these people, their opinions of Israel is changed forever. And it's corrected basically from all of the brainwashing that they've been receiving from the murderers who actually were killing them. I do want to ask you about this, Ruth. The Syrian side was basically taken over by Assad and its allies. And your NGO that you created that helped so many families, basically the operations of your NGO stopped. I want to know about your reaction, you and everybody who was involved, and your thoughts about this, and how did it change your views and your belief in future coexistence or peace with the neighbors?
Wow, so many to say about it. uh, I will try to step by step to organize my thought. First, I think there is tiny seeds of maybe peace and humanity that were planted here. I don't know, but maybe one day they will grow and blossom. At least that is my prayer. I must say, you ask how it impacted me, and it definitely, I admit, impacted me enormously. For the first time, I think I truly understood the meaning of mutual responsibility for humankind. And when I say mutual, I mean mine, yours, or everybody of the audience right now. We have mutual responsibility for humankind. That's what I deeply understood. I realized that it isn't a privilege or, a good deed, so to speak, but it's an obligation. It's a duty for all of us to act, not to stand silent. I know, me too, everyone thinks that we are small, that politics are beyond us, that they belong to the world leader, and we can't understand it or influence it. It's too big. But I learned that every single person, that's what I learned, because we came from nothing, from zero, and I understood that every one of us can influence humankind and bring good to the world, even tiny, even it's a little bit. And it's our duty, like it's not an option, it's a must. I do believe that the majority of the humankind wants to live in peace. We want to live normally, everyone of the people want to live normally. But when it's reached to mass slaughter of ethnic groups, the evil regime creates a terrible reality, and then we don't hear this majority. And the only way that this majority to be heard is by taking action. That's what I learned from this, and making ourselves known. Otherwise, by silence, you let the evil win. And it's a very sad understanding, but also it's a big inspiration for me. I'm working to make this, I think I'm working to make this my next project.
And Eyal, so I do want to share this with our audience. I was born in Syria myself. And as somebody from the region, I did see the transition of how people reacted to Israel, to the point that there were people online asking for Israel to actually have forces and create some sort of safe zone in southern Syria on the borders. And that's why when I talk about the IDF operation to save the white helmets, that was an Israeli involvement beyond probably what Israel wanted to get involved, because Israel decided that they are not interested in being involved as much. And it's very important for our audience to understand this, is that the people in Syria and in the region were hoping that Israel will actually have a military presence in southern Syria to protect these people who were asking for Israel to stay or to be there, because Israel only helped the Syrians on the borders. So can you share with us about the process of making that decision And why was that the ultimate decision by Israel? Not to be as involved as probably people would have hoped for at that time.
So first of all, you're correct. You said correctly. People from Syria asked the IDF to go inside Syria. It was like demonstration. We want the Israel. We want the democratic. There is movies spirit that you can see Syrian women asking for Israelis because they are better from the Arab countries who are just sitting on their chairs and do nothing. Now, the Israeli policy from the beginning of the Israeli government was that we are not going to be involved in that civil war because this is an internal issue. Now, as you might know, unfortunately, politics, if Israel was involved, Israeli soldiers would have entered just 2 meters in Syria, everything was against Israel, and the Hippocratic word I should mention, automatically will be condemned. Israel, the Israeli occupation. Basically, today, Syria is occupied. Syria is occupied by Turkey, by Iran, by Russia. But if Israel would have just entered 1 meter, everybody would have spoke about the Israeli occupation, and it was a threat to Israel. So what we have decided is to be for our side of the border and to help the civilians. This was the decision, and this is how we react. Now, I can say that, again, I heard about the Syrians asking us, for example, when the regime bombed the cities and the villages in this last 6 weeks, we found 50,000 human beings running, escaping from their homes and cities, reaching 500 meters from the Israeli-Syrian border because they knew that at this place nobody will bomb them. We spoke with Syrian wounded when they entered Israel. They told us because the border between Syria and Jordan wasn't closed all those 6 years. They had the opportunity to go to be treated in Jordan. And they said, no, we prefer to be treated in Israel because we know that your doctors will treat us like we are Israelis. It was a huge discussion in Israel. For example, if you are reaching and getting Syrian wounded, there is one possibility to save his lives, and there is the second possibility is to save his lives and rehabilitate it. It will cost you another couple of millions shekels, but the decision was that we will treat the Syrian people like they are Israelis, meaning that the doctors will do whatever they need to do, how much it will cost in order to save their lives. So the Syrians knew this, and they chose to be treated, to be evacuated for Israel, not to Syria. So this is a little bit about that issue. I can say, again, I'm too small to speak about politics, but I think it was a very good decision from our government because we don't need to be involved in this Arab policy, in these Arab Spring events. Again, unfortunately, it will not do good. By keeping these rules, by providing help from our side of the border, friends, we could save thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And I will just mention one thing. In the beginning, we thought about helping just the people living in the villages next to the Israeli-Syrian border. After 6 months, we got requests from people living in villages over than 40 kilometers from the border. Those doctors visit operation, we got children reaching from 35 to 40 kilometers from the border. We didn't expect it in the beginning, but because they asked and because we could have do it, we decided that we will not refuse them and we'll tell them, no, because you are far away from our border, we will not going to treat them. When you're human beings, when you're civilians, you need help, come to the border fence, we will take care of you. It will cost us more money, but it is okay.
Israel today is continuing to confront now the Iranians and Hezbollah elements with the Assad regime who are encroaching on Israel's borders, and they are bringing in weapons, and Israel is now confronting them militarily and continue to do so. But in your opinion, what will be the desired result, knowing that they continue to bring in weapons? We saw what they were doing with the provocations against Israel also very recently. How do you see this unfolding?
So unfortunately, one of the things that happened that because of the Iranians saved Assad regime, today they're doing whatever they want to do in Syria. And one of the things that they want to do is to come closer to the Israeli border by helping or by using Hezbollah and other Shiite militias, people from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Shiite warriors getting paid by Iran and going to fight against the state of Israel, the Jewish devils, etc. And they are taking advantages about Syria. Now, the Israeli policies, we cannot allow them to do so, and this is why from time to time people hearing about mysterious bombing in Syria. Unfortunately, the Iranian regime is continuing to do this. Now, I will ask a very simple question. There is millions of people in Iran dying from hunger. We know that the Iranian money is collapsing. We know that the Lebanonian money is collapsing. Why you are not taking the hundreds of millions of dollars you are paying for your Shiite militias, for your radicals' thoughts, and influence it in your own people? Of course, Khomeini will not answer about this question, and unfortunately, they will continue trying to do this. So, first of all, I think that the only way to fight against this is, first of all, to react against them when we're speaking about bombing, because we cannot allow them to open a front against Israel from that border. It's 100 kilometers, 60 miles of border. It will be a disaster for the state of Israel if we will have a second Hezbollah, because in the northern border from the state of Lebanon, we have those 80 kilometers of these radicals, Islamic Shia warriors, and we cannot allow them to be in Iran. And the other thing is to continue that the world will finally understand that the only solution is to continue these sanctions in order to prevent them paying money to Hezbollah and to the Iraqi militias, because Iran, what they are trying to do is to rebuild the world, but not with peace, with terror attacks all over the world. And unfortunately, they will not stop, because they had their vision, and their vision is to make the world like Shia. But now, again, I don't have nothing against Shia. I have something against people using the religions in the extremist ways. And unfortunately, this is what the Iranian regime is doing. So for Israel, the new situation in the last 2 years is very challenging. Unfortunately, I think, as much as I can estimate it, it will continue to be challenging in the couple of the next years. Hopefully, the end, they will not be able to do so. There is the Israeli operation. There is, I think, also the relationship between Iran and Russia, because they had a contrast interest in Syria. And I think that the Russians are more powerful than the Iranian in Russia. And they understand that also the Russian will understand that when Iranian presence in Syria, it's against their propaganda. So maybe they will be able to send them a little bit back, but it is going to be, the next year is going to be very challenging for the state of Israel from our eastern border.
Yeah, I do want to point out to our listeners and viewers that Hezbollah and the Iranian-backed militias and the Assad regime in Russia, they have all committed mass atrocities in Syria. Yet, when you were speaking, you were on a tour and you were speaking about the Good Neighbor Unit and what you guys have done in London, and there were people protesting against you at a university, trying to cut you off, trying to walk out. And it's really baffling for somebody like me, born in the region, being an American, just seeing the major disconnect of people. But I want to hear your reactions after being involved in this, helping all these people and just seeing the reaction of people who are not from the region. They probably have no clue about what's happening in the region, what Israel has been doing, what Israel's role has been. Because when Israel confronts Iran in Syria, for example, the entire region, the Arabs, cheered Israel on. So, this is where the major disconnect, but I do want to get your reactions about this. When those people come in and they're protesting against Israel, why don't you go and protest about the hundreds of thousands of people being slaughtered every day by the Iranians, by the Assad regime? Why are you so silent about that? I mean, this is the definition of either complete ignorance or hypocrisy. So what is your reaction to this?
It's in ignorance, because when I reached Warwick University and the KCL, King's College London, I wanted to share with them a story about helping each other, and I became a war criminal. Now, what is embarrassing, I think, is the ignorance, because when you're going to universities, the first thing you expected from students is not to take things as granted. You're expecting from students to learn facts and then to judge. Now, as a person living in a democratic country, it's very important that people will be able to demonstrate against. Now in Israel, in the last 2 weeks, we have demonstration against the Israeli governments, against the people who demonstrate against the government. And it is okay. This is the meaning of democracy. People can say whatever they want to say without thinking. We are not living in Syria. We are not living in Iran. In those countries, if you were to say something bad against the regime, you can kiss the sky goodbye. You will be disappeared. But what is so embarrassed in what happened in London, that people start to shout against me, war criminal, because of the occupation in Gaza. Now, if they had just knew where is Gaza on a map, if they just knew
that Israel is not in Gaza, actually.
Now,
Gaza is occupied by Hamas.
Exactly. If they just knew those facts, if they just knew the fact that, for example, Gaza have an international passage with Egypt, who refused to take Palestinians because Hamas, who is the government now in Gaza, is supporting ISIS, the Egyptian branch of ISIS, and they're collaborating with them while they're slaughtering Egyptian soldiers. So Egypt refused to get people from Gaza, but they do not know these facts. Now, when it was in Warwick University, when those, I don't have, unfortunately, we are broadcasting, but I don't have any other word unless stupid people jump and start to shout, because if they've just waited, I could have answered them everything. But what was the good point, that when those people shout against me and I was moving a little bit aside, there was some Muslim students reached to me. People who were, countries are from Saudi, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and they apologized. And they said, we are Muslims, we have our own thinking about Israel, but came here to hear you speaking because we want to understand your point of view. And we had 30 minutes discussion about Gaza. Now, I didn't try to convince them in nothing. I just showed them facts. I can tell you by their eyes that after we finished, they had gone and Google to read, and then go and judge and say whatever you want. Why those people are waving and shouting? They're getting money. There is the SJPs, there are the BDS, hundreds of millions of dollars, unfortunately paying by even government and organization, Jew haters, and they're getting money. They are shouting and shouting. I can assure you, Haifi, nobody from those British students, nor the people in the US, in California, in UCR, in Riverside University, who protest against me, knows where Israel. You know, when I was in the state in February, just before Corona, and I started to speak in Riverside University, there was entering the SJPs and entering people from the LGBT.
Mm-hmm.
the gay, I don't know
Yes.
if I'm
LGBT community, yes.
LGBT. Now, they, when I started to speak, they protest against me. The student go out. Now, I just want to ask them, do you know that if you will go to Gaza and declare yourselves as gays, for example, you will be executed? In Iran, you will be executed. In Iraq, you will be executed. In Syria, you will be executed. The only place that will give you the opportunity to live normal life in the Middle East is Israel. So how you are protesting against us? This is what I'm saying. They do not learning the facts. They're getting paid. They are thinking their ideas without checking, without examining what is really happening. For me, it just gave me the power to continue do what I'm doing, to continue speaking about this operation. And I'm always saying that if, because there is 10%, there are 15% that are with Israel by far, and there is 15% that are against Israel by far, but there is 70%, the majority are people, human beings, that do not know the facts. And when I'm speaking, I just encourage them, go and learn the facts, and then judge, and then decide whether you're with Israel, whether you are not with Israel. Do you want to condemn Israel? Do you want to support? Again, the Iraqians, the Iranians, the Syrians government will not say that they are doing bad things. Israel will say we're not completed, we are not 100% like you, the Americans, like the most of the Western country. We are criticizing ourselves. But I think that if you will want to choose where do you want to live in the Middle East, most of the people, including the Arabs, will vote for Israel, although the occupation, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, and I do want to contrast, this is like going to be my final point, is the contrast that's happening, that in the Middle East, the people are opening up to each other. Arab activists are going to Israel. People are speaking about Israel in a different way. They understand that Israel has so much to offer the region, that actually the region has been missing out on a lot of the Israeli technology, innovation, science. The fact that Israel is also confronting the Iranian terrorism that's been spreading in the region. But in your opinion, I mean, when we contrast this, I do want to talk about the region and the hopefulness that's happening, the change that is happening in the region. How is that, affecting your views about where things are heading, seeing these developments, seeing these initiatives by people in the region to open up to each other and to bridging between Israel and its neighbors?
One of the things that happened because of the spreading of the Iranians' radicals' ideas is the Sunnah world, the countries of the Gulf, Oman, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, realized that Israel, Saudi Arabia, of course, realized that Israel is not a real threat. And there is some progress between Israel to those countries. Now we can see that an Etihad airplane from Abu Dhabi just landed in Israel a couple of months ago. He was providing medical medicines for the PA, and the PA decided to not to get it because it landed in Israel. So go and figure out those leaderships of the people who prevent from their own people medicines because political issues. But I think that the Arabic word is understanding that Israel is not a threat of the Middle East. And some brave leaders trying to move forward and to rebuild or to reopen connection between Israel to those countries. I think that Israel have a lot of to contribute to those countries because most of it, if they do not have the oil, they are they are not have, for example, very progressive agriculture and the technology, and the Israeli, the Israeli brains can help them. I can see that it is coming step by step. Israel's sports team is going to compete in Gulf countries. So step by step, it's becoming a progress. I can also share that some of what we have done, like Operation Good Neighbor, our neighbors heard about it. Our neighbors heard about it, and it's also changed a little bit their minds and their perspective about Israel. Because when you are speaking with Arab people, and when you are let them to show what you're doing, not by speaking, but doing, today they are living in other places in the world, and they are speaking with their relatives. For example, one of my biggest followers is a Syrian refugee. Now, he was living from time to time in the Gulf countries. He has friends there. So when he's speaking with them about Israel, and it's voice to voice, a voice to voice, it become understanding that Israel is not a threat, that the Israelis do not want to conquer the Middle East. We just want to live in our country safe by safe. And this is like Ruth said, we need to be powerful for this, and we need that our neighbors will understand that we are here for stay, but whoever will want to live with peace with us, I'm sure that our leaders will take it and want to live with with any country that will choose to be in peace with Israel. We will not refuse for peace.
Thank you so much, Ruth and Eyal, for this wonderful interview. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I would look forward to have you again in the future. Thank you all for listening and watching The Untold with Hevi Buzo. I would love to hear your feedback, your comments, and your thoughts, and see you next week.